most difficult ever attempted and the most dangerous. Probably extremely true. And Apollo 13 plays out really with how dangerous this mission really was. Because if what happened on Apollo 13 happened on Apollo 8, those astronauts don't come home. So, in any case, we are celebrating all the 50th anniversaries. We did Apollo 7, we talked about that already. Now we're heading into Apollo 8, and we will continue on for a few years here as we go over. This is the first flight of that biggie. And remember, during Apollo 7, we were just flying the smaller Saturn 1 rocket. Now we're flying the Saturn 5 with people for the first time. It had flown unmanned previously, but now we're flying it with people. So, what are some of the details of it? Well, it flew from 21 to 27 December 1968. This was the third flight of the Saturn V. It was the first manned mission from Kennedy Space Center. All the previous missions had launched over from the Canaveral side. This one was from Kennedy. 68 hours to the moon. They did 10 orbits around the moon and then came back. This was originally supposed to be the third mission. Ends up being the second. And we'll get into the details of why and what happened. So what happens as well with this one is because of an injury to Michael Collins, neck injury, Jim Lovell gets put onto the crew. So the crew of it is Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, and Bill Anders. So Frank Borman is the commander of the mission. Jim Lovell is the command module pilot. And Bill Anders is the lunar module pilot. But there's no lunar module on this flight. But they're still flying it with 3 people simulating the Apollo, just the same as when they flew during the Apollo 7 mission. Interestingly enough, until you get to the shuttle era, it's really the only mission where the person who's not the commander is more experienced than the commander. Jim Lovell had more flight time and had been a previous commander, and Frank Borman had fewer flights, etc. So kind of an interesting thing, but it's because of that injury to Mike Collins that Jim Lovell ends up on the crew, and that's why, and that's how that came about. Some people are always kind of curious, why did Jim Lovell not get command? But that's why. In any case, here's the logo for it, Apollo 8. You see kind of the logo there with the 8 going around the Earth and the Moon, because they flew to the Moon, but it kind of shows it in a free return trajectory, but they actually did orbit around the Moon. But interestingly enough, Jim Lovell is the one who came up with this concept while flying cross-country in a T-38 in the back seat. And did a little design on it, and then they had one of the NASA artists really flesh it all out. Trying to clear my throat there. Okay, so here's your 3 astronauts. This is when they're doing the rollout for the spacecraft. So you've got Frank Borman, then Jim Lovell in the middle, and Bill Anders on the right, just so you know the look of who's who in the zoo. Here they are again, Jim Lovell on the left, Bill Anders up on top, and Frank Borman on the right in their white spacesuits with their nice little overshoes on the bottom. I love those, the galoshes. Similar shot. These were all in preparation and training. So, Apollo was originally designed to be a 7-step process. You had missions A through G. So the A missions were unmanned tests of the Saturn V in low Earth orbit. That was Apollo 4 and 6. Apollo 6 actually had issues where they had problems with pogo. They had issues with engines that didn't light off. There was a number of problems. And this is the first flight after that. So they had problems, big problems on Apollo 6. Then they flew Apollo 8 after that with men on it, Saturn V, that is. Apollo 7 wasn't flying Saturn V, but they flew it saying, yep, we got all that stuff fixed, but they didn't do another test flight in between. Okay, so you're already starting to see some of the added danger in here. Okay, so you had the unmanned tests of the Saturn V. The B missions were unmanned tests with the Saturn V and the lunar module in Earth orbit, in low Earth orbit. That was Apollo 5. Then the C missions were manned Earth orbit flights of the command and service module. Apollo 7 was supposed to fly in October of 1968. Then you had the D missions, which were going to be manned flights with the lunar module as well in low Earth orbit. That was going to be Apollo 8 in December of 1968. This is the original plan. Manned the E missions, manned lunar module in a large elliptical medium Earth orbit, Apollo 9 in early 1969. And then the manned command module and lunar module going to lunar orbit, That's eventually kind of what Apollo 10 does. And then the moon landing, which is the G mission. That's Apollo 11. Something gets a little screwed up though, you notice here, because this isn't the route that we actually did. So here's what happened. Oh, excuse me. Go back. Gene Kranz, flight director, talking about George Lowe's decision to fly the command module to the moon on Apollo 8. It was the boldest decision of the space program. It's a heck of a quote coming from an individual who saw it all. Okay, so June of 1968, the Apollo 8 lunar module, remember Apollo 8 was supposed to be a lunar module, a command module flying in low Earth orbit, which eventually does happen on Apollo 9. You'll see all this play out. It arrived at Kennedy Space Center, but there were still hundreds of problems, over 100 significant deficiencies with the spacecraft. So they were working on it constantly, and it was not ready to fly. And as they're looking at it, they're realizing that it won't be ready to fly until potentially March of 1969. So go back and remember this. Okay, if you take that timeline, remember, fly to the moon, man safely to the moon and back, and bring him back by the end of the decade. That's 1969. March 1969, you finally get that D mission going. Then you got to do the E mission. Then you got to do the F mission. Then you got to do the G mission. Lunar landing doesn't happen until after 1969. So they're already realizing that based on the issues with Lunar Module 3, they're not going to make it to the moon by the end of the decade. This is really not good, and they're trying to push Grumman as hard as they can, but it's a first flight, of the spacecraft, similar to the fact that North America had issues with the command module. But now that deadline is closer. So in any case, are they going to make that goal? Probably not. So in August of 1968, and the first really significant meeting happens on August 9th, George M. Lowe, the guy who's right here, okay, he's next to Von Braun there, meets up with Deke Slayton, he meets up with Chris Kraft and Robert Gilruth, and they have a discussion where Lowe proposes, okay, let's push back that lunar module and command module mission, make that the next one. Let's take the command module. Now, mind you, the command module hasn't even flown yet. Apollo 7 doesn't occur until October. So we haven't even flown the command module yet. It says, let's take the command module and by itself fly to the moon. And originally they're talking about a free return trajectory. Just fly it out there and loop back around and come back to Earth. Everybody really looks at this and said, they start to look at it and say, there's a lot of stuff that could be done. Knock out a lot of the stuff on those missions, on that mission profile. Here all of a sudden with one, as people called it, some people called it, concept of a Hail Mary pass, to the moon. So there are subsequent meetings. August 14th, there are phone calls to Vienna, where Jim Webb, the head of NASA, is. They talk to Kurt DeBoos, who's the head of Kennedy Space Center, Phillips, who's General Phillips in charge of the program, Von Braun, Rocco Petrone, etc. All these key NASA people, and start to get them on board. Now there's hesitancy, and there are stipulations that are coming out, but everybody's seeing the advantage of it, and really all the things that they could continue, because that command module will be ready to fly, etc. They figure out, yep, we'll be able to get the rocket ready. How about those issues with that we had on Apollo 6, the pogo, the engines, the fuel lines, things that had happened. And Von Braun and the team at Marshall Space Flight Center said, yep, we've got all that figured out. We know exactly what happened. We fixed it. Here's the solutions, et cetera, et cetera. We'll be ready to fly. The rocket will be ready to fly. Command module will be ready to fly. Yeah, we got essentially 4 months. We'll be able to get the crew ready to go. So you're talking about the head of the Manned Space Flight Center, Bob Gilruth. Everybody's on board. Jim Webb initially is saying this, whoa, hold on. He's not convinced. He wants them to, to figure out some more stuff. But they go, they figure out what are the solutions to these issues, and eventually even get Jim Webb on board. But they don't want to announce it until after 7 flies, for obvious reasons. Kind of make sure the command module works before you actually really bring this out. But they know that this is what we're going to do. So they do make the decision. So what it becomes is a C prime mission. So it's similar to the C missions, which were the command module flights, but now you're going to go all the way to the moon. One of the things Chris Kraft, right here, he said, no, we're not just going to go to the moon and loop around it and come back. No, if we go up there, we need to go into orbit around the moon, and we need to stay there, and we need to test out everything, so for the mission. And while we're doing that, we can get some scientific benefit prior to the mission of photographing the landing sites for the future missions, et cetera, et cetera. So Chris Kraft was really the proponent saying, let's not just fly there and loop around, but let's stay there. And that's what ends up getting proposed. So George Low, navigation to the moon, getting into lunar orbit, the burning of the big engine, the Service Propulsion System engine on the back of the command and service module, the computer programs that were needed for that, we could get all of that out of the way. Talking about just some of the advantages of this mission while they're waiting for the lunar module to be ready on Apollo 9. So George Low, it was a mission that we would have to face sooner or later anyway. Okay, one of the other impetuses for making this decision is what's going on in the Soviet Union. Remember, we're in a space race. Remember, they've been beating us for a long time, etc. We were now kind of beyond them. We really had, but they were still trying to make it to the moon too. Once again, the competition. They make it there before we do. So they had the N1, the Soviets had the N1 and the L1 programs. The N1 was the giant rocket. They try flying it, by the way, they try flying it 4 times, fails all 4 times. That's the one that they're going to use to fly to the moon and land on the moon with people. The L1 program is utilizing a modified Soyuz capsule, no orbital module, a big antenna on it, and then using a proton rocket to fly it instead of the normal rocket that they were using. And that was going to fly to the moon and be able to send people to the moon and bring them back, but not land, similar to what we're going to do with the, eventually here with the Apollo 8 mission. September of 1968, you've got the Soyuz rocket here, Soyuz capsule on a proton. They do launch it. It does go on a circumlunar flight. It is loaded up with some biological samples, tortoises, mealworms, wine flies, and some other stuff. It goes there, it loops around the moon, does not orbit, just does that free return trajectory, comes back, and they land it on Earth. In fact, there it is. We had one of our ships nearby in the recovery area, and we pulled up right alongside while they were recovering it, and actually watched them pulling the samples out of the spacecraft, etc. So yeah, kind of that constant competition that was going on. And then they fly Zond 6 in November of 1968. So this is all the same time frame. So this is yet another driving thing, because we're sitting here thinking they can put people on that spacecraft and then they get to the moon first before we do. So Zond 6 flies November of 1968, also a circumlunar. They do a skip re-entry. So basically skips off the atmosphere, comes in, same thing that we do at times. Partial, but the problem is on this capsule coming back, the capsule partially depressurized, which killed all the biological samples. And then as it did the skip re-entry, et cetera, and as it was coming in, built up a huge static electrical charge, had a coronal discharge, which actually caused the parachute cables to cut, and also the retro rockets to fire while it was still like 15,000 feet in the air coming down. So needless to say, the capsule hit with a little bit of extra force. They were able to recover the film and stuff from it, but now they've got to figure out those problems. Delay for them. So in the meantime, we're seeing all of this and saying, we got to get there. And we got to get there quick. So Apollo 8 now becomes our chance to really beat the Soviets to the moon. So this was yet another piece of that decision making. You've got one other issue. If they're going to fly this, they're going to fly it in December of 1968. They're talking about a launch as early as December 6th, but really the dates that they're looking at are the 20th to the 26th time frame. It ends up being a little bit different from that, as you know. But the 20th to the 26th, the Navy's already made the decision and that everybody's going to be everybody's going to be home for Christmas. So now, because guess where the recoveries occur? The recoveries occur out in the ocean. And so they have to have the fleets out there and the ships ready in multiple locations to be able to recover the spacecraft and the crew. So now, and it's right at Christmas. So now all those people who were going to be sent home are now not going to be home. And so they're going to have to tell everybody, well, so Chris Kraft gets voluntold that he is going to go and brief John McCain's dad. John McCain is a prisoner of war at this point in time, in case you didn't know that. Senator John McCain. This is his dad, who's an admiral, who's in charge of the fleets and sailors. And so, big briefing. All the Navy folks in there, tons of captains, some admirals. He's sitting in the front row, dead center. Chris Kraft gets up, talks about what NASA wants to do, talks about what the mission plan is, talks about why they're deciding to do what they need to do. Remember, this is early on. This is before it's announced to the public, very obviously. Why? They need to beat the Soviets. You know, this is a matter of national prestige. This is the way that NASA is able to meet the deadline. This gives the whole laundry list of reasons and how they came to the decision, George Lowe's proposal, et cetera, et cetera. McCain at the end of it just stands up and says, that's the best damn briefing I've ever heard. Give that guy everything he wants. So, in any case, so that's how they ended up getting authorization for that. Bob Gilruth, the director of the Manned Spacecraft Center, said it broke the back of the Russian moon landing effort and it left the U.S. free to take its time and concentrate on doing the job of landing a man on the moon. Okay, so what is the mission going to be? One other thing. Remember, you had Apollo 8 and 9, and you had crews already chosen for these. And you had the Apollo 8, which is going to be the lunar module and command module. Well, the crew for that one, which eventually does fly in Apollo 9, Deke Slayton and stuff, they offered this flight to them, but the crew of Apollo 9 decided, especially the commander, decided that no, we still want to do the test flight on Apollo, that we were going to do with the lunar module. And so they end up bumping back to Apollo 9, and then the follow-on mission moves up to Apollo 8. So and that's how you end up with Frank Borman and his team, because they were supposed to fly the next mission after that. Okay, so what's it going to be? Launch off of Earth, fly to the moon, get into lunar orbit. By the way, the moon's moving this entire time. Gee, what a surprise. Lunar orbit for a while, trans-Earth injection, come back to Earth, land on Earth, yay, success, made it to the moon, etc. Couple of diagrams of it, yeah. Okay, so this is what they're going to be flying in. This is the actual command and service module from Apollo 8. Remember when we have talked in previous lectures about Apollo 9, and I mentioned this before, that the call sign for it was gumdrop. This is why, because when it comes out with all that plastic wrapping around it, they said it looked like a gumdrop. So here's the crew training. You're seeing pictures of them from when they were doing water egress training, when they were doing centrifuge training, just some things like that. Just a couple of pictures of them. This is from the water egress training. And here's the rocket, October 6, 1968, doing its rollout. So this is the first time that man are going to be flying on the spacecraft. So the rollout's a little bit of a big deal. So it takes quite a while to roll out there too, by the way, 6 hours. Okay, so eventually you get to launch day. So kind of skipping ahead here to launch day. Make sure we're at time. Perfect. So, okay, so here's the crew. We have shown you, I've shown you pictures in previous lectures, and you've seen them before, of the astronauts walking down these hallways. I think I've shown you the pictures of them walking down the hallway, and the one secretary had the Snoopy doll in her hands, and so, but they're walking out, they've just been suited up, and they're heading out to the launch pad. You've got Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, and Bill Anders back there, coming out to get into the astronaut van, and then eventually the launch, and I love that image right there, the launch with the moon in the background. It's one of my favorite images from the space. And so it's on its way. And as the engineer said, all of the issues that occurred with Apollo 6 did not occur on Apollo 8. They did fix all of them. That's 363 feet long. Okay, so they get up into orbit. They park up in orbit for a few hours, get up in there, make sure that the spacecraft is fine, that they're ready to go. They go through all of their checklists, and then eventually they get the first go, because they do the go, no go, just like they do for launch. Now they do a go, no go in mission control for translunar injection, TLI. That's firing the engine to head on their way to the moon. So they do get that authorization. They fire off the engines, burn them for a while, get up sufficient speed to escape Earth's orbit, and head on their way to the moon. This is the upper stage. Normally in this space right in here would be a lunar module. So what they did is they put a lunar test article, LTA, on the inside of there that was the same weight and center of gravities, etc., as the lunar module. And then the crew on the way did some formation flying with similar to what they need to do. Because remember, eventually, when they fly to the moon with the lunar module, and even if they're doing it in low Earth orbit, they're going to need to separate, turn around, come back, dock with the lunar module, pull it out of the upper stage, and then head on their way. So they do some of that at this point in time, test it out, photograph, maneuver around, eventually separate themselves from the upper stage, and then head on their way to the moon. Early into the mission, Frank Borman starts to get sick, starts to throw up and have diarrhea. They clean up as best as they can, but stuff was still floating around the capsule. Yeah, not a pleasant thought. In any case, probably what was going on was probably space adaptation sickness, which hits up a third of the astronauts. They didn't see it so much with Mercury and Gemini because of the cramped quarters of the capsules, but they do see it in Apollo and moving forward from there because they're able to move around, etc. In any case, though, but Frank gets sick. He thinks it's just a short bug, so I'm going to be feeling fine. Don't tell Mission Control. They don't want to broadcast it over the radio. Yeah, Mission Control. Hey, the commander's barfing and things you don't want to say on your way to the moon. Back to Mission Control and everybody on Earth. So what they do is they put it into the mission tape download, so that they're backup information on experiments, equipment, stuff like that, that's not critical to mission operations, is put onto a tape backup and sent down and then listened to later. So they put it onto that, and then they hinted pretty strongly to Mission Control that they should listen to the tapes, which they did, saw what was going on, talked to the medical folks, set up a kind of secure discussion about it with the crew, and determined that, yeah, there's not much we can do about it. Probably is some sort of 24-hour bug. As long as everything continues on going, keep going. You're into that coast phase. You're going to be navigating, etc. You should be okay for now. But they're worried, so no surprise there. They end up doing a TV broadcast. They end up doing 6 TV broadcasts over the entire stretch of the time. Some on the way to the moon, some in lunar orbit, and then on the way back from the moon as well. Sending back images of the Earth, the moon, etc., etc. So talking, you'll see pictures from, here's pictures from some of the TV broadcasts. This is actually Jim Lovell navigating. If you want to see, this whole stack right here, which is the ping system, the primary navigation system for the Apollo program, you can see one of those up on our 4th floor. There's only 2 complete ones in existence anymore. One's at MIT, and one's here in our museum. And the only reason that they're complete is the one at MIT. It's where they built it. The one here, it's because it's a hodgepodge of pieces from multiple missions. Pieces of that flew on multiple. What's that?
Third floor?
Oh, third. Okay, yeah, it's on the 3rd floor. So in any case, though, but in any case, it's made up of pieces from multiple missions. And so when they were doing a big recall of materials back in the 1970s, and they scavenged some of these pings units, this is one of the ones that just survived because of that. Okay, so navigating to the moon. One of the things that you're really going to need is computers to do it. So Margaret Hamilton down here was one of the key people. So sometimes we always talk about all these different peoples. She was one of the individuals involved with programming these computers and designing the software. That concept of software, it really wasn't necessarily software at this point in time. But in any case, this is the team. It was kind of funny when I was looking at this picture online. It said the team watching the, observing the Apollo 8 mission, and I'm looking, going, they're all wearing Apollo 17 patches. It's like, yeah, okay, something's something's up there. But in any case, pictures over here in younger days, inside the command module. This is what they were building. A 1, think about computer programming. It's all ones and zeros, really. A 1 was a wire going through the magnetic ring there. A 0 was a wire going around it. And the programming was done essentially by what they called the little old ladies. Putting this stuff together like at Raytheon and places like that. And Mark working on it. And then as they're doing the programming for this and trying to take into account what could happen, what happens if Margaret, one of her anecdotal stories from it, which I thought was absolutely hilarious, before the Apollo 8 mission, she would bring her daughter to work, and her daughter would just kind of hang out. Well, her daughter at one point in time was playing around with one of the diskies. That's the digital keyboard entry, the keypad, essentially for the ping system. She was playing around with one of the diskies or whatever, and she entered in a code into it, and it caused the system to crash and erase part of the memory. This P1 code was what she entered. In any case, though, and Margaret looked at that, she's like, oh boy, figured out, a way to get around it. But she said, this could be a problem, if the astronaut accidentally enters the wrong information. Said, we need to take this into account, and come up with a backup plan. And she kind of came up with what to do if, I'm describing this very simplistically, but in any case, the management all said, oh, that won't happen. They won't enter the wrong thing. They'd have they double check everything. So guess what happened? Oh, wait, Jim Lovell accidentally put in the P1 code and erased part of the memory of the navigation system. And by chance and fortune, Margaret's daughter had already done the same thing, and so she knew exactly how to fix it. I have an interesting anecdote. Okay, television broadcast. Here's Frank Borman, looking much better by this point in time, obviously. Bill Anders. And there you've got Jim Lovell. By the way, on that first television broadcast, he made sure that he said happy birthday to his mom. So, because it was her birthday that day. Okay, so 68 hours into the mission, they're approaching the moon. Literally, they have seen the moon 10 minutes before they actually do the LOI burn. Because they finally turned the spacecraft around and they've just seen the moon. But they don't have time to enjoy the view at this point in time. Because they're getting the order for LOI, lunar orbit insertion. So Capcom 68 hours says you go for lunar orbit insertion, you're riding the best bird we can find. Well, Jim Lovell responds back, we'll see you on the other side. Now mind you, okay, they're firing the SPS, to slow down, get into that lunar orbit. First time this has been done. If it doesn't go right, if the engine's supposed to fire for, we've got down here 4 minutes and 7 seconds. If it fires for longer than that, they crash into the moon. If they fire it for shorter than that, they don't go into orbit and they skip off and they just go into oblivion. Neither of which are good options. So in any case, they burn, they come back around to the other side, and guess what? They fire exactly when they're supposed to, and they are in lunar orbit. Now the mission of what they're supposed to do with the moon goes in earnest. Probably the key individual here for this portion, well, they're all key individuals, obviously. Jim Lovell is doing a lot of the navigation command module on the way there. Bill Anders' job is primary for photography, photographing the lunar surface, and he's got a very, very specific and very detailed schedule of everything that he needs to get photos of. And so he is laser focused on that, very laser focused on getting all of that done, to the point of worrying about it a little excessively at times. But in any case, and then Frank Borman obviously maneuvering the spacecraft to make sure that they're in the right orientation for all of the science and all of the observation and all of the planning that they need to be doing. So these are just some of the images that they take during their orbits, and they do 10 orbits around the moon. Oops, sorry. And here's some description. I forgot. Yeah, so I always put it in quotes. The moon is essentially gray, no color. It looks like plaster of Paris or sort of a grayish beach sand. That's how Jim Lovell described it. This is the first time humans are seeing this. It's the first time humans saw the far side of the moon, not the dark side, the far side of the moon. Looks like a sand pile my kids have been playing in for a long time. It's all beat up, no definition, just a lot of bumps and holes. Bill Anders.
What's their altitude off the surface at that point?
60 miles. Well, not exactly 60 miles. Their orbit was just, it varied between 58 point something and, yes, but roughly 60 miles. Yes?
Where's the illumination coming from to get those photos on
Sun.
the backside of the moon?
The sun. Remember, the backside of the moon gets sunlight just like the front side does.
We just don't see it.
This mission was actually very specifically programmed. I shouldn't say the backside. The front. Say something, Jim.
Yeah. Well, what they did is that they launched
So it's
3
just-
days after a new moon,
Yep.
so that most of the backside was illuminated.
Yeah.
Oh.
They planned, and that's exactly what I was just saying. Before we start, they planned the Apollo 8 mission such that, and specifically, it wasn't necessarily that they were worried, about the far side being illuminated. It was the landing sites, which happened to be at that, which is what they were looking at. They wanted, and it was where the landing sites were, the Tranquility, the Sea of Tranquility. They wanted the best lighting on that for the photography. So for when they were in the orbit, that's how the mission was planned, the launch times.
Dark side of the moon only works as a Pink Floyd.
Yeah, Pink Floyd.
How long does each orbit take?
Ooh, shoot, I forget his name.
Like 2 hours.
About 2 hours, yeah. Because they were in orbit for just about 2 hours. Okay, so one of the other things, like I said, they did television broadcasts from the lunar surface. So this is actually looking out the window of the command module and what was being televised back to the people on Earth. So this is kind of what they were seeing. This is what the astronauts are seeing. This is what the people on Earth were able to see. Frank Borman, it's a vast, lonely, forbidding expanse of nothing. Great description. Okay, so one of the other things that occurred is that they did a Christmas Eve broadcast. And so during that broadcast, when they were showing those images of the moon that you saw there, one of the most famous things that came out of the mission, and there were multiple of that, but one of the most famous things was that they finished up that broadcast from in lunar orbit by reading from the book of Genesis. And in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, etc. Each one of them read a section of it, Frank Borman being the last one to read. Jim Lovell started, then Bill Anders, then Frank Borman. And when Frank Borman finished it, and they had finished reading from the book, those verses from the book of Genesis, his final statement was, "And from the crew of Apollo 8, we close with good night, good luck, a Merry Christmas, and God bless all of you on the good earth." So extremely famous at the time. Eventually, Madeline Murray O'Hare sues NASA and the federal government for the astronauts who are federal employees injecting religion into the space, which basically she just gets told, yeah, whatever. But it does make, she's told legally, yeah, whatever, they're allowed to do it. But NASA gets a little gun shy and warns them not to do anything, to the point where on Apollo 11, Buzz Aldrin does communion on the surface, but he keeps it very, very quiet about that and doesn't really announce anything about it. So, it's just kind of an interesting aside. But during the fourth orbit, while they were up there, a series of pictures, 3 pictures are taken, one of which becomes extremely famous. Not this picture. This was the first one that was taken. It's taken with a black and white camera, very obviously, and it is just seeing the Earth rising. Now the Earth's not rising; they're actually orbiting around the Earth, so it's not, the Earth's not moving; they're moving around the moon. But in any case, but it looks like an Earth rise at this point in time because it comes up above the horizon, and they see it and they're stunned. The spacecraft was actually maneuvering as this happens. And there was discussion over who took the picture. And the argument was between Frank Borman and Bill Anders of who really took the image. Frank Borman said that he took it, that he had wanted to take it. And Bill Anders says, no, we need to keep shooting the lunar surface. And Frank Borman's like, no, we need to take this picture. That'll be the important picture of this mission. And that's the way he told the story for many, many years. Bill Anders said, no, I took the picture, picture's right here. And it's not like they have the camera thing that says who took the picture. Jim Lovell chimed in jokingly, frequently saying, no, I took the picture. But he was just joking. It was really between Frank Borman and Bill Anders. It wasn't figured out until later by people, once again going back and listening to the recordings inside the capsule, which had been classified for a while, because they had the audio recordings of all the discussions inside the capsule. And they went back and listened to those, and then took a look at who was doing what. And yeah, the spacecraft was maneuvering. Gee, who's maneuvering it? Frank Borman. Okay. And as it came up, and the action and the angles, and they also were doing, as we've had the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter going around the moon, they have done recreations of, of some of the missions and the landings and things. Well, they also did recreations of this and figured out what exact angles the capsule was at, etc., to be able to see the things that they did, etc. And they figured out that as the thing was maneuvering up, that Bill Anders' window was the one that had this, had the angle to see it. And when you listen to the recordings, actually, it was Bill Anders saying, hey, we need to get this picture, and he took a picture of the black and white. He's like, Jim, give me a color, give me a color cartridge, etc. So, and Jim Lovell gives him a color cartridge, and he takes a second, gets that put into the Hasselblad, and then he takes the next two photos. But it was actually Bill Anders. What Frank Borman was remembering was in a previous orbit, Bill Anders had been taking pictures of the lunar surface, and Frank Borman said, hey, you need to get this picture over here of this one. NASA want that, and Bill Anders was like, no, you need to get this picture down here. And that's what Frank was really remembering, not the Earthrise picture. So, funny to the point where one of the authors who did the research and figured that out, his wife sent Frank Borman a picture of one of the solar eclipses that had happened or whatever. They became very good friends, obviously, in knowing. But in any case, sent him a copy of one of the pictures or whatever. So he jokingly sent back an email saying, "Yeah, Bill Anders will say he took that picture too." So, in any case, joking around. But the more famous picture, this is the one. Remember the stamp, and everything, the magazine covers, et cetera, et cetera. This is the image. It's the first of the subsequent two images that gets utilized. But this wasn't the image. That was the image. That was the actual angle that the picture was taken at, and the orientation that Bill Anders was in when he was taking it. The magazine moved it this way because it's easier to understand. It's easier for us to comprehend Earthrise when we see it as an Earth rising, not as an Earth moving laterally. And there's Bill Anders with one of the Hasselblad cameras right there with the 250 millimeter lens on it, et cetera, et cetera. We came all this way to explore the moon, and the most important thing is that we discovered the Earth. These were the first people to see the Earth in its entirety. It was as they were traveling away for the first time, and they looked back and were able to see it in its entirety. And then they saw it from the surface of the moon, the Earthrise. And remember I said, it stunned them. So Frank Borman actually at points had to focus them back on their missions because it was so easy to get distracted by all of this stuff that was being seen for the first time. This is another picture. Frank Borman actually did take this picture, so took it with a different lens. Okay, so they finish up those 10 orbits. Now they're ready to come back to Earth. The next thing they need to do, remember, translunar injection is the firing of the engine that sends you on your way to the moon. Trans-Earth injection is the firing of the engine that sends you on your way back to Earth. Once again, if it fires too long, if it fires too short, bad things happen. You can be stuck there in lunar orbit for forever. Not that you'd be alive after a while. But in any case, so they're firing it. And after they do the trans-Earth injection, NASA had predicted that in 89 hours, 28 minutes, and 39 seconds, they would reacquire signal and communications with the spacecraft. And at 89 hours, 28 minutes, and 39 seconds, they reacquired spacecraft. Jim Lovell said, please be informed, there is a Santa Claus. And Ken Mattingly said, that's affirmative. You are the best ones to know. As they were on their way back, they did more television broadcasts, broadcasting the Earth. You can see it up there on the mission control screens. Obviously, this is mission control down there in Houston. Bill Anders was quoted saying, "I think I must have the feeling that the travelers in the old sailing ships used to have, going on a long voyage from home, and now we're headed back. I have the feeling of being proud of the trip, but still happy to be going home." There's the television image. Kind of tough to really tell anything except for you can't see that it's an Earth. And remember, it's not like we could broadcast back those pictures that they were taking. Those had to be processed afterwards, so people hadn't seen that yet. This is all that they were seeing. But this was, similar. This is what you're seeing on TV. This was the pictures that they were taking. Jim Lovell described it the Earth from here as a grand oasis in the big vastness of space. These guys really turned into poets on this mission. Really did. A lot of great quotes from this mission. So eventually they re-enter Earth's orbit. This is artist work done from North American Rockwell out in Downey. There's an actual picture of it re-entering. And recovery. They land in the ocean. Remember all those sailors that had to be out there? Yep. So here's some of the frogmen on the capsule. The crew landing back on the carrier. Waving to everybody, eventually giving speeches after a little while. Mission debriefings. Just kind of laughing at one of the things being talked about. Because of the pictures, because of the discussion, because of the significance of it. January 1969. Bill Anders, Jim Lovell, and Frank Borman are named Men of the Year. First time the Time had ever done it with multiple people. Because of that mission. You just see people sitting here watching it on TV. Life, the incredible year 1968. The Earth is seen from space. Remember, all those images now are right after the mission are being promulgated out. Okay. And I've got a T-shirt on here. It's got the thing that says "Keep Calm and Save 1968." One of the telegrams that was received by the crew on their way back from the moon was from a lady who just said, "Thank you for saving 1968."
Wow.
Yeah. Not a good year. Sorry. In any case, one of the other interesting things, they got telegrams from all sorts of folks. They got a telegram from Lindbergh. Lindbergh was actually, and his wife were actually with them the night before the mission. Talked with him, and then they actually observed the mission the next day. But they were there and talked to him, and he talked about the amount of fuel necessary for his flight and how he calculated it by taking a string on a globe and measuring it out, and then measuring that out distance-wise and figuring out from that what the actual distance was, how much fuel he'd need, etc. And they were actually calculating that I'm trying to remember, was it 40 or 400 times that amount of fuel were being burned every second by the engines on the rocket that was now taking those guys on the way to the moon. So, kind of fascinating. So, okay, Army Navy's tomorrow. I gotta put that up there. I have the flag up here, and I'll put it over there after this is over. But one of the things about it right there, President Bush 41 just passed away here recently. I've had the pleasure of meeting him and spending some time talking with him. He did sign this flag for me and wrote "Go Navy" on it. He signed, there's 12 of these in existence. One of his baseball card from Yale that he has signed, and then some pictures that he signed to my family. And we talked about the Navy, and I was a submariner, and he had spoken at one of the graduations at the Naval Academy I was at, and so I just thought I would bring those down here if anybody wanted to see those afterwards. If you're interested in more information about the mission, this is a really good book, Genesis, by Robert Zimmerman, about the landing. So I'd highly recommend reading that if you want to read more about the entire mission. And if you want to watch something that, it's not 100% accurate, but once again, the From the Earth to the Moon series by HBO is really good about giving a summary of the entire Apollo program. It's a great series, and for the most part accurate. For the most part, very accurate. So, okay. With that being said, are there any questions?
I was wondering about the time in orbit. Like low Earth orbit's like 90 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
So how's the orbit around the moon so much longer? With gravity or?
Just has to do with the 1/6 gravity, the 60 miles.
Well,
1/6
no,
gravity.
it's the distance to the
Distance,
moon.
yeah.
So as you get further away from the moon, your orbital time
Yeah.
increases. So in low Earth orbit, you got about 90 minutes, the Hubble Space Telescope. It's about 370 miles up, it's about 96 minutes. If you go out to geosynchronous orbit, that's 24 hours. If you go out to the distance to the moon, that's about 27 and a half days.
Right, the 2 hours around the moon, the moon's smaller, the weighs a lot less.
So when you go into orbit around the moon, now you're into a different two-body system. It takes about 2 hours to go around the moon.
So there was a question in the back first.
Yes. I do not recall the information about the Soviets spacecraft going up, looping the moon and coming back. Was that classified at the time?
No. The Soviets.
It was publicized?
Yeah. Yep.
It's probably not very well. Yeah.
No, the Soviets, Soviets put out information about it. So, but once again, it wasn't a manned flight. So,
Was it in the U.S. newspapers, or
as far as I know, yeah.
Walter Cronkite commented
It was,
on it
yeah.
sometime? It was?
Yeah.
I just don't recall.
I don't have any copies of any of the stuff from it, but yeah, those things were talked about, so, and it was putting pressure on NASA. That's part of why it was. So, yes, the information, the Zond flights, Zond, 5, etc., that was publicized, because it was a successful mission. Come back. The N1 flights, because you remember you had the L1 program and the N1 program. The N1 flights, those 4 flights, not publicized at all. That was all secret. We knew about that for other reasons, for spying on each other, same as they knew about us. In fact, if anybody ever asks you, did we land on the surface of the moon? There's a million answers, as to how you prove that we did or we didn't, and some of them technical, and some of them have to do with LRO and what you can do, blah, blah, blah. Here's the key one. We were in an incredible competition with the Soviets, the Cold War. The space race was one of the key elements of that Cold War. We were watching each other like hawks. We had spies. We had spy satellites. We had, plane flight. We had everything going on, watching each other's programs, knowing exactly what they were doing, having people infiltrated into the programs, yada, yada, yada. Okay. If we did not go to the moon, do you not think that the Soviets would have said something about it to the rest of the world when they were watching us? But they didn't. They congratulated us on it. That, to me, is the ultimate answer as to why.
Congressional support for the landing of the starting flag. Congressional support for the landing of the starting flag after the Apollo 1 fire. So the CIA gave Jim Wright special clearance to see the satellite images of the enemy vehicle. So he could go to Capitol Hill and say, the Russians have got a darn big rocket going on the launch pad. They're serious, they're in the race. Support is close behind you, just try to tail. And that helped keep things going.
Yeah, I've been over to Kazakhstan, and I've seen the cradles for the N1 rocket. The N1s don't exist; they all got destroyed. But the cradles for it still exist, and they're adjacent to the building where they assembled the Soyuz capsules, and where they also had the Buran spacecraft, area. But in any case, they are massive. Oh my God, they're huge. So, other questions?
Those critical burns that you described earlier
Yeah.
about skipping or coming down, they were computer controlled, or were they manual burns?
No, everything was computer controlled. The astronauts would enter the commands to execute the burns and timing and stuff like that, but they were all computer controlled. So but trust me, the astronauts were there, and they had a stopwatch, and they were ready. 4 minutes and 7 seconds. Okay, they were ready. If that did not shut down at the right time, they were ready to go and kill the engine.
And I imagine there was things were in a state of flux, it could vary, maybe a second or two, maybe
Actually, everything was pretty well laid out, but everything was recalculated as it went along. Back there first?
I have a mundane question. This Earthrise photograph, which is so famous, I'm just curious, did NASA ever receive royalties for as much as that photograph was used?
They don't receive
They don't receive royalties for anything.
Is that right? Okay.
You can utilize anything, because you've already paid your taxes, we've already paid for the images,
Understood.
you can utilize it for anything.
Thank you.
In fact, excuse me, one of the pictures he had Getty Images.
Yeah.
Blazoned on there.
Yep.
And they will charge you for that image, which you own.
Yeah.
It's a scam.
Yeah. That's why I have no compunctions about putting it up there with getting images on it.
Did the lady, you mentioned Hamilton was her name?
Yeah.
Did she have anything to do with training the astronauts on how to do the computer
No.
stuff?
No. And I've not read anything that said she was involved with any of the training. That was all done by NASA folks. She was working for a company kind of thing, yeah.
I had a story about the thrusters. The thrusters were calibrated by Rocketdyne. If they weren't calibrated, none of that would work.
Yeah, exactly, so, and once
That's why
again,
Russians didn't go to the moon.
yeah, the SPS engine, the one that fired up there, was a hypergolic engine. You mix the two fuels, they're going to ignite and they're going to fire. It's not like it had really anything else other than make the two chemicals go together.
But you have to measure the output and the
Yeah.
impulse.
Yeah.
Or it doesn't matter.
Yep. Any other questions? Yeah,
Just an
sorry.
observation where this is a hoax. Too many people involved.
Yeah, that's the other part of it, so try and get 3 people to keep a secret. Now you're talking about hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands that would have to keep that secret. Yeah, it ain't happening, so, yeah.
Occasionally.
When they were launching? Well, yes, there were, because even when you take a look at Apollo 13, the center engine cut out on the Apollo 13 flight, of those F1 engines. So all they did was they burned the other engines longer. But they were able, and yes, the computers took into account, and were able to then calculate that out. Mission Control checks that. Can I help you, sir? Sorry, I was trying to answer his question.
Sorry.
So, in any case, though, so yes, there were tolerances. Yes, they could, but when you're talking about the SPS engine, that's one where, if it fired, all the calibrations that had been done, as he was mentioning there, they knew what the thrust from it should be, and so that's, yes, it's watching everything else of the velocities, et cetera. So yeah, it could adjust, but as long as the engine was firing with the right amount of thrust, 4 minutes and 7 seconds. Any other questions? Yes.
As an observation, during the Vietnam War, I was in the Air Force Station at Vandenberg Air Force Base. We were launching spy satellites, about 30 a year. And every single launch, at the pre-launch briefing, we got a status report on the Soviet observations of Vandenberg. They had submarines, frigates, and trawlers off the coast. What they did is they try to receive the telemetry and see if we could code their telemetry.
Yep. Well, and I will tell you that even into the 1980s, when I was on a ballistic missile submarine out at sea, if we wanted to go up to periscope depth, one of the things we checked ahead of time was exactly what satellite passes were occurring. Were they in our area? Were they at the right time, et cetera? If they were, we changed the times of our stuff so that we knew when stuff was, around, et cetera. Yeah, so yeah, everybody was watching each other.
Just an observation I had, I traveled back and forth to Las Cruces and Korea. One time I just happened to be there instantly before they closed. So I'm driving through there and there's 3 tractor trailers with their hoods on. And I'm thinking to myself, now isn't it pretty obvious the cops have traveled that would know how many times I lived through them? I suspect that maybe just happenstance these people were looking at that launch.
Oh, yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, I don't know.
been at my wedding in '77 with Science Editor of Blissful Times, at that time, and he broke the story that we were planning on moving around the moon. We got the information because they were running computer trajectories. Predictions rather at Marshall Space Flight Center, and public affairs leaned on the paper to get them to go back on it, because NASA wasn't ready to announce it until one day public affairs at Johnson Space Center called and told the managing editor, if I were you, I would not let one more day go without running that story. And they suddenly just got out.
Yeah. So, and they did, and they, you know, there was NASA, even after they made the decision that they were gonna do it, they were just announcing, well, we're looking at multiple options. You know, and one of the things that they did mention was going to the moon. So they had said that they were thinking about it, but the reality of it being the choice, you know, was not broken until then. Yeah, sir. Yep. Let's look at the last question.
You showed a picture there of Anders with a Hasselblad camera, and you said he had a 250 millimeter lens?
Correctly, yeah, that was the, yep.
What kind of film or something was he using? Because none of the pictures that I see are blurred or jittered, and he doesn't appear to be even using
Hasselblad cartridges are about this big with, you know, the loop of film on the inside. So,
70 millimeter film.
yep,
Square format.
yep.
That's not a long telephoto for that camera.
It
Yeah.
is.
It's a large format camera, so that's not normal,
Yeah.
almost, it's just a slight telephoto.
Yeah.
That's equivalent to maybe a 75 millimeter on a 35 millimeter camera,
Yeah. It's because of the film format.
because it's a larger film.
Okey doke.
Also, he wasn't fighting, the gravity, was he, holding the camera steady?
True, yeah, and one other thing, while they were photographing the surface of the moon, they did have automatic cameras that were set up as well, taking a picture every second. Different types of camera, et cetera. Additionally, you know, they're going around the moon during the orbits. Frank Borman was able to get some sleep at one point in time. Part of the reason they thought he might have been sick originally as well as he had taken a sleeping pill. And they thought maybe that made him sick, you know, back in the original things as well. That was one of the things they were thinking about. He slept for a while, but then he woke up as he realized that Lovell and Borman were starting to make some mistakes and having difficulty communicating with Earth. And so he put them to bed, said, and Bill Anders actually fought him on it. Oh, I need to take these pictures and everything. And Frank Borman said, no, you guys get some sleep. And then he monitored the spacecraft for a while, took some pictures occasionally. So, but yeah, they, you know, sometimes mission constraints, you know, of just people come into play as well. So, Kathy, what's our next lecture? And what else do you want to put out?
Well, it just so happens I have a lot to say, which is normal for me.
Yeah.
So tomorrow, we have our very popular Science Saturday at 10 o'clock, right, Dave, in the theater front classroom? What will your topic be?
It's going to be about the New Horizons spacecraft and the flyby of MU-69, a tiny, tiny icy body way the heck beyond Pluto. That will happen on New Year's Eve. So we'll talk a little bit about what, how the spacecraft is built. We're going to have a little mock-up quarter-scale model that the kids will work on to put together. Learn a bit more about spacecraft guts, geysers on Triton, which we think may be on Pluto, and some other fun stuff.
Great, and that's 10 to 12. That's a free activity for kids. So if you've got kids or grandkids, or you know somebody with kids and grandkids, send them on up. It'll
Or
be
you're still a
pretty
kid.
interesting. And then on the 22nd, of course, we have the Warehouse 1402 tour. That doesn't start until next year.
Yeah. Yeah.
You said January, is that next year? I meant December, I thought I said December 22nd.
Okay, sounded like December.
Okay, well, nevertheless, Sue, our curator, and her intrepid assistant, Jim, will be presenting a program on the Delta Clipper experimental, and I believe you'll be doing that here on the first floor, is that true?
Right, and the weather permits, then we'll go over to the Daisy track. You know, if it's not too cold, rainy, slippery, or anything like such that there.
Great, and then we will be closed on Christmas, just so you know. We're gonna stay home with our friends and family. And we've got a lot of interesting things coming up in January. I think one of the most interesting things and exciting things that we've got coming up is the move, and you guys can't say anything. You're all sworn to secrecy, because we've not sent out a press release. The German Air Force gave us a Tornado, and we're gonna move it up here.
Really?
Yes. So if you're interested in finding out when that happens, so you can come and watch, be sure that I have your email address. You can sign up right back there on that piece of paper by the coffee pot. So thank you all for coming, and last but not least, our new outreach coordinator, Tony Gondola, will do a presentation on January 4th for the Launchpad lecture, and his topic is the moon before Apollo. So we look forward to that. Yes, sir?
Do you have printed copies of the schedule that you are holding?
Why, indeed I do. Right next to the place where you give me your email address.
Thank you.
Bring it up. Thank you so much for coming. I do admit that this ends at the end of December 22nd, so
I'll be back and get a new one.
very good.